Well, hello. Do you want to test you?
Hello.
Good start. Well, we've just heard you called Emma, but could you tell us a little bit more about yourself, a little introduction?
Yes, I'm Emma. I'm married to David, and we live in Hurstpur Point, a village just outside Burgess Hill. We go to a church there called Good News Church, where David is the pastor. And we have a little boy who's coming up 3, and he came home to us through adoption at the end of 2020.
So just picking up on that last point then about the adoption, could you tell us a bit more about that process and some of your experiences and learnings throughout that?
So adoption had been something that we had talked about like relatively early on in our relationship, as something that we both had a heart for. I guess felt that as Christians we should be concerned about. But I think realistically we thought that was quite a long way down the line, and that was something we'd sort of seriously consider later. We got to the point of wanting to start a family. Quite quickly realised that wasn't going to be very straightforward because of some underlying health conditions that I have. And sort of felt like we reached a crossroads really of, we've said this is a really good thing. Maybe this is the point that God's asking us to kind of positively pursue that route as like our first choice of growing our family. So we sort of dipped our toe in the adoption process and said to God, there's going to be so many opportunities for you to close this door. We know that this is going to be a long process. Please close the door if this is not the right thing. But if it is the right thing, please keep opening the doors. And he did. And we had a very bizarre adoption process. We did it almost entirely virtually. We met our social worker once, and then we did everything else online, which was very bizarre. But he just kept opening the door. And I think our overriding experience was his faithfulness and his grace through that time. We were very nervous about it. We were very anxious about different parts of it. It was challenging. It was grueling at times. But actually, I can remember one week where we were thrown some unexpected information quite late on when we had already found out about our little boy, and we had quite conflicting professional opinions about what we should do, and it was really hard. But earlier on that week, we had driven through the most incredible rainbow I've ever seen in my life. And I've never seen one that bright and beautiful since. But that was a real marker of just God's faithfulness, and just keep going, just trust me, and I will lead you. And he made it very clear which child he had in mind for us. Again, another part that we were really anxious about. But he was so faithful through that process.
Thank you. I should say that Emma's said she's very happy to talk to anyone at the end if there's anything you want to, talk to her personally about. But just looking at this again, were there any particular parts of this process that you didn't expect that were a bit of a surprise?
I know that I'm conscious there are a lot of people who have been in different parts of this process, and I can only talk about my story. But one thing for us that did surprise me was actually they did view our Christian faith and our church community as real positives. And as a ministry family, we weren't necessarily expecting that. But on every report that was written about us, the fact that we had the support of a church community, the fact that we had a faith motivation, that it was almost outside of ourselves, it wasn't us trying to complete our perfect family, but actually we had a bigger vision of why we wanted to do this, was actually viewed very positively. I'm conscious that's not the case for everybody, but I think there is a move growing in that direction. And I know that certainly in West Sussex, they are now working very closely with a charity called Home for Good, seeking to resource, particularly fostering with Christians, because they have seen that Christians are really well placed to foster and adopt. So I think that was a surprise for me.
It's really good to hear. It was a surprise to me. That's good. Now, we all know that parenting has its challenges. What would you say were the particular challenges of approaching parenthood via adoption? Would you say any particular lows? Let's start with some lows.
I think 2 things really. For me, actually, I don't think I saw coming how hard I would find coming to parenting for the first time through an assessment process. And actually, we were given wonderful training. We read loads of books. And then suddenly you've got this child, it's 0 to 100 mile an hour parenting. He was 15 months when he came home. So it was teething, crawling toddler straight away. And actually, as somebody who has suffered with some anxiety in the past, I became very anxious about what happens if I don't do this right, and actually aware of my own weakness in parenting, really. And you're entrusted with this child who has not had the best start in life. But actually, it's something that God has been teaching me to just. I was reminded of the verse, His power is made perfect in my weakness. And there will be days where I won't get it right. But His grace is sufficient for each day, and I can trust Him. And He's ordained it. So I think that has been one challenge with a lot of professionals involved. It's quite intense. That's one challenge. I think the second thing really is that perhaps is specific to adoption is every child who comes through the adoption process has suffered some degree of trauma. And even, bringing him home, taking him away from his foster carers was a trauma in itself. And I think there is a burden that I carry of, and perhaps having to process, what happened to him before we even knew him and when I wasn't there. And, he's a lovely, bubbly, sociable little boy, but what has happened to him does affect him every day. And that's hard. And I guess God has been teaching me I just need to keep bringing him before him. And that's the best thing that I can do. And actually, that he's sovereign over that, and I can trust him with that. But I guess that's an added challenge for us.
I think we can all appreciate that. And maybe some of the highs. What are the particular highs can you remember?
So many. It is a joy. He is a joy. He's a delight, and it's wonderful to see him growing up and happy. I think particularly for a child who has suffered multiple, attachments that have attachment figures who've been removed from his life. The fact that I guess when he has learned to trust us, that was all the more precious, wanting to come to us for a hug, being comforted by being with us, shouting for mummy, even if it's 4 a.m. That's is precious in a different way, because for him, that's a journey and that's taken time, and kind of a lot of work has to go into those attachments. But that's precious. And I think as well, just seeing him as part of our wider family, playing with his cousins like he's always been there. He's been so wonderfully and warmly welcomed into our church family, who are all very protective of him, which is wonderful. Just seeing him as part of those wider communities that we're part of, a bit like he's always been there.
Thank you. And just to end, and remember that you can talk to Emma at the end about anything. What would you say has been your biggest learning experience? What keeps you going?
I think we know that this journey might not be easy, and that there may well be challenges ahead, and sometimes that can be quite daunting. But I think that the fact that we have hope, and that we are part of a bigger story, and he may find that as he grapples with his life story and his identity, that can be very murky or confusing. We don't know how that's going to be for him. But I guess the fact that we believe we're part of a bigger story, and that we've been created primarily in God's image, and to grow up to be like Jesus, and that his identity is not first and foremost rooted in his birth family, it's not first and foremost rooted in us as his adoptive family, but actually in being a child of God. And my prayer for him is that he would know that, and that he would come to grapple with some of the difficulties and challenges, knowing that God has been there, even when we haven't been there. He has had his hand upon his life, and that my prayer is that he would know that his first and foremost identity is sure in being a child of God, and that is unshakable. So that's my real prayer and my hope going forward. Yeah, for him.
And ours too. Thank you so much, Emma.
Thank you.